All right, let's dive in. We've got this super interesting blog post all about leadership and growth, and it's got me thinking a lot about how we approach, well, just about everything.
Oh, yeah. What is it about this one that's got you hooked?
It's the author's whole take on reflection, like they really emphasize setting aside actual time for it. They even have a dedicated space, they call it their study. It's where they do all their reading and research, listen to podcasts, even just think.
A study? That's pretty cool, actually. And these days it feels like everybody's just rushing from one thing to the next. Nobody's got time to just, think.
Exactly. So I'm curious, what stands out to you about that whole reflection thing? What's the link between that and like the big picture of leadership?
Well, to me, having a space like that, it's like making a statement, right? It's like you're saying, this time is important. This is for me to grow. And for leaders, I think that's huge.
I see what you mean.
Think about it. When you're a leader, you're constantly bombarded with decisions, problems, information overload. It's easy to lose sight of, well, everything. But if you can build in that reflection time, it gives you the space to step back and see the bigger picture.
Makes sense. So it doesn't have to be a literal study, right?
Oh, definitely not. I mean, it could be anywhere. A park bench, your favorite coffee shop, even just a quiet corner at home. It's more about creating that mental space where you can disconnect and just think.
Speaking of stepping back, this author has a really interesting perspective on challenges. They see them as opportunities for growth, which is something we don't always do. They even told this story about a colleague who lost a major deal and how it ended up being this incredible learning experience for them.
Oh, I remember that story. It's all about the power of feedback, right? Even when it's tough to hear. And let's face it, we all have blind spots. Sometimes we need someone else to point those out, to help us see what we might be missing.
For sure, and it's not always easy to take, but feedback is it's like a gift, even when it comes in really bad packaging.
Haha, exactly. And really good leaders, they don't just accept feedback, they seek it out. They know that if you want to grow, you got to get comfortable with being a little uncomfortable.
Now, this is where it gets even more interesting. The author talks about this idea of the growth imperative. That phrase really grabbed me. I don't know why.
It's powerful, isn't it? And it's not just about getting bigger or more successful. It's this idea that you have to constantly be improving, evolving, both personally and within your organization.
Because if you're not growing,
You're falling behind. Think about companies like Blockbuster. They were huge, but they didn't adapt, and look what happened.
Yeah, Netflix ate their lunch. So growth imperative, it's about staying relevant in a world that just doesn't stop changing.
Right. It's about recognizing that what worked yesterday might not work tomorrow, and you've got to be ready for that.
I like that. And speaking of being ready, the author also talks a lot about proactive leadership, which is something I think we can all struggle with. It's about anticipating problems before they even happen, building strong foundations, always thinking ahead.
It's like playing chess, always think of a few moves ahead of your opponent.
Exactly.
It's so different from that reactive style of leadership where you're just constantly putting out fires.
Oh, I know that style all too well. So what would you say is the key difference in mindset between those two approaches?
I think with proactive leadership, it's all about being intentional. It's not just reacting to whatever comes your way. You've got a vision, a plan, and you're making things happen instead of just letting them happen to you.
It makes you wonder, where could we all be a little more proactive?
Right. In our work, our personal lives, our communities, there's probably a ton of opportunities we're missing out on just because we're stuck in that reactive mode.
This is making me think already, just from talking about it.
And, all this talk about change and proactivity, it really ties into this other point the author makes about future-proofing yourself. It's about making sure you're building the skills and knowledge you're going to need down the road.
Yeah, because the skills that are in demand today might be totally obsolete in a few years. It's crazy how fast things are moving.
It's almost like a paradox, right? You spend all this time becoming an expert at something, and then the world changes, and suddenly you're a beginner again.
I could see how that would be intimidating, especially if you've built your whole career around a certain skill set.
It's definitely a challenge, but I think that's where that whole growth imperative comes in again. It's this ongoing process. You're never really done. You've got to be willing to adapt, to learn new things, to kind of reinvent yourself.
So what would you say is the best way to do that? How do you stay ahead of the curve like that?
Well, the author actually recommends carving out time each week, even if it's just an hour or two, to learn something new. It could be reading an article, listening to a podcast, taking an online course.
Anything to keep those brain muscles flexed.
Exactly. It's all about making that consistent investment in your own development so you're not scrambling to catch up when things change,
I like that. So shifting gears a little bit, the author also has this really interesting perspective on competition. They actually see it as a positive thing, like a teacher, not an enemy.
Oh, I love that. It's so easy to get caught up in that whole us versus them mentality. But if you can reframe it and see your competitors as sources of inspiration, it opens up so many possibilities.
Right, it's like the author says, your competitors are often your best teachers because they're showing you what's possible.
Exactly. Instead of getting defensive or threatened, you can study what they're doing, see what's working for them, and maybe even learn from their mistakes.
Turn it into fuel for your own growth.
Exactly. And that ties back to that whole proactive thing we were talking about earlier. You're not just reacting to your competition, you're actually studying them, learning from them, and using that knowledge to get better.
It's almost like turning competition into a form of collaboration in a weird way.
I like that. And the author gives this great example of how they observed a competitor's marketing campaign, and it totally sparked a new approach for their own marketing strategy.
So it can actually drive innovation, right? Push you to think differently and come up with new ideas.
Absolutely. Competition can be a powerful catalyst for growth if you approach it with the right mindset.
You know, thinking about all this, it makes me realize the importance of having a clear vision and strategy for yourself. You can't just be drifting along hoping to outmaneuver the competition. You got to know where you're going.
That's so important. The author talks about that a lot. Having a well-defined vision for the future, both for yourself and for your organization. It's like having a compass to guide your decisions.
Yeah, and you need the courage to stick to that vision too, right? Even when things get tough.
Absolutely. And that's where strong leadership comes in. It's not just about, giving pep talks and motivating people. It's about creating a vision that people actually want to follow, a future they're excited to be a part of.
It's not just about leading people, it's about leading them somewhere worth going.
Right, exactly. And that takes real understanding, understanding the big picture, anticipating the challenges, and then making bold decisions that align with that vision.
Wow, this is really making me rethink my own approach to leadership. I'm definitely more of a put out the fires kind of leader. I haven't really taken the time to think about the long-term vision thing.
Well, I think a lot of us get stuck in that mode. We focus on the day-to-day stuff and lose sight of the bigger picture. But as the author says, it's that strategic thinking, that ability to see the whole board and create a compelling vision that really separates the great leaders from the rest.
It's like you need both, right? The ability to handle the day-to-day stuff and the ability to step back and think strategically.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance.
This deep dive is really opening my eyes to all the different facets of leadership and how it all comes back to this idea of constant growth.
And it's not just about professional growth either. It's about personal growth too, expanding your own understanding of the world, your own potential, your own capacity to lead and inspire.
It's holistic.
Exactly.
And I think one of the things I appreciate about this blog post is that it's not just theoretical. The author really brings it to life by sharing their own experiences, both the good and the bad.
Totally. It's not just some abstract concept of leadership. It's about real people facing real challenges and finding ways to overcome them. Makes it way more relatable.
Like they're saying, hey, I've been there, I've messed up, I've had to adapt and learn, and you can too.
And that message of resilience, that's something we all need to hear.
Oh, speaking of resilience, the author also talks about how to build resilience, not just in ourselves, but in our teams and organizations as well. They even have this analogy about a forest fire.
Oh yeah, I love that analogy. It's about how a healthy forest is designed to withstand fires, It has those natural fire breaks, and the trees themselves are adapted to survive and even thrive after a fire.
Nature's got it all figured out.
Right, and the author applies that to organizations, saying that we need to build in similar kinds of resilience, so we can weather the storms that are inevitably going to come our way.
So instead of trying to prevent every single problem, you're focused on building systems that can absorb the shocks and bounce back stronger.
Exactly, and that could include things like diverse teams, decentralized decision-making, a culture that's open to experimenting and learning from mistakes.
It's like creating an environment where it's okay to fail because failure is just part of the learning process.
And speaking of learning, the author is a big advocate for creating a culture of continuous learning within organizations. It's not just about sending people to training once a year. It's about weaving learning into the fabric of everyday work.
Yeah, they talk about things like having regular learning lunches where team members can share what they're learning and creating internal mentorship programs to encourage knowledge sharing.
Those are some great ideas. It's all about creating a culture where people are constantly learning and growing and sharing what they know with each other.
It's like turning the whole organization into a giant learning lab.
Exactly. And that's what that growth imperative is all about. It's not just about individual growth. It's about creating a culture of growth that permeates the entire organization.
So if we connect all this back to the author's idea of proactive leadership, it's not just about anticipating problems and building resilience. It's also about creating a culture where people are continuously learning and growing.
You got it. Proactive leaders, they don't just lead from the front. They cultivate an environment where everyone feels empowered to learn and grow and contribute their best ideas.
It creates this amazing cycle, right, where growth feeds more growth.
A virtuous cycle.
I like that. And it's something that we can all be a part of, both individually and collectively. It's pretty inspiring when you think about it. All the possibilities that open up when we embrace that growth mindset. It really is inspiring. And you know what else I found inspiring about this blog post? It's not just about what to do, it's also about how to do it. Like the author doesn't just say reflection is important, they actually share their own personal practices.
Right, like that morning pages thing they do where they write 3 pages of like stream of consciousness every morning. I thought that was fascinating.
Me too. I've heard of that before, but I never really understood what it was all about.
Yeah, it's not about writing something amazing or even making sense, really. It's more about just getting everything out of your head and onto the page. Kind of like...
Like a brain dump.
Exactly. The author called it taking out the mental trash, which I thought was a pretty great way to put it.
Yeah, I like that. And it makes sense because when we don't process all those thoughts and emotions, they can really pile up and like clutter our minds.
Totally. And all that mental clutter can make it hard to think clearly, to make good decisions. Morning pages or any kind of regular reflection, it can help clear out that space and make room for new ideas.
I can see that. And the author also talks about scheduling reflection time throughout the week, not just first thing in the morning. Like they actually block off time for things like going for walks, listening to podcasts, even just sitting in silence.
Wow, that's commitment. But it shows you how important they think it is. It's not just something they squeeze in when they have a spare minute.
It's a priority. That's a good reminder for all of us, right? Like reflection isn't a luxury. It's essential for growth.
Totally. It's like that saying, the unexamined life is not worth living.
Ooh, that's a good one.
It's through reflection that we can actually look at our lives, our choices, our beliefs, and figure out how we want to move forward.
You know, one thing that really stood out to me in this whole conversation is that growth doesn't always have to be these big dramatic changes. Sometimes it's about making small adjustments, to our thinking or our approach.
Oh, absolutely. Little tweaks can make a huge difference over time. It's like they say, inch by inch, it's a cinch. Yard by yard, it's hard.
Love that. And it reminds me of something else the author said about celebrating small wins. They're big on that.
Yeah, they say don't wait for those huge victories to celebrate. Acknowledge every step forward, even the tiny ones.
Because those small wins, they build momentum, right? Keep you motivated to keep going.
Exactly. It's all about recognizing progress, no matter how small.
And that ties back to being proactive, right? Instead of waiting for good things to happen, you're actively creating opportunities for growth. Every single day.
You got it. It's about taking charge of your own growth journey.
Well, this deep ride has been amazing. We've covered so much. Reflection, the growth imperative, feedback, proactivity. We even talked about competition. Who knew you could learn so much from your competitors?
It's incredible how much we've unpacked just from one blog post.
Right. But I think for me, the biggest takeaway is that growth is a journey. It's not about reaching some destination. It's about constantly challenging yourself, learning new things, and expanding your horizons.
And the best part is we don't have to do it alone, right? We can learn from each other, support each other, celebrate each other's wins.
It's a team effort. So as we wrap up here, I want to leave our listeners with a little challenge. Think about those areas in your life where you feel stuck. What's one small step, just one, that you could take today to embrace that growth imperative we've been talking about?
It could be anything. Maybe you finally sign up for that online course you've been eyeing, or reach out to a mentor, or even just set aside 15 minutes to reflect on your goals.
Whatever it is, just start somewhere. Take that first step and keep moving forward, 1 inch at a time. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, everyone. We'll see you next time.